This is Dan, rather Richard, at the XYZ newsroom in Scotia. We're now going to bring you a special remote broadcast from our roving reporter, Julie Caldwell, with a special interview with August Casper. Now, Julie Caldwell. Okay, when did you enter the service?
Well, let's see. You got to turn it around or something.
Well, the mic's here.
Well, I was drafted in the draft that occurred in 1940, and I actually went in 1941 in January, looking for the date. January 14th, I think it was, 1941.
So you went in as a short sleeve, huh? Private.
I was a private and went to the 9th Division down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Oh. Right. So where did you go from there? I mean, do you finish your initial training at Fort Bragg? They send you right away overseas?
I was initially assigned to the 9th Division, which was a regular Army outfit, and was a member of Headquarters Company. I had various jobs in communications and intelligence platoon. I was a driver of one of the vehicles. At that time, we were to serve in the Army for a year and then be discharged.
Oh.
Except that Pearl Harbor came along and we were told to canceled our getting out, and we stayed in.
So when you got in at that time, you were in for the duration, right? And you had no choice.
We had no choice at that time. They extended our time.
Huh.
This was a time when, at that time, they began to expand the Army. So they would take cadres out of the regular Army divisions and create new divisions. Reserve divisions were called up, and they would have a cadre from the regular Army. So we kept losing people. There also was a big demand for officers, and I went to officers' school, so I left the 9th Division in 1942 and went to Fort Benning to become an officer.
So was that what they called the OCS program?
Yes, we were 90-day wonders.
Yeah.
We went to school for 90 days.
That's what my brother.
The training was basically what we had before, except we got more tactics and different weapons training than we had before.
Wow.
When you were discharged, what was your rank then? After you came home?
I was a captain when I got out.
And when was that, 1945?
45, right.
Would that have been after victory in Germany, or would that have been after the Japanese surrendered, or?
After the Japanese surrendered, right. But during my career as a new officer, I was put in one of these new divisions, the 88th Division. It's a reserve division out in Oklahoma. we had our training, and we were I think the first reserve division to go overseas. This was after there had been landings in Africa. And we followed and went into Africa.
And that would have been what, 42, did you say?
Yes, I think that was in 1942.
How did you travel overseas? How did you get there?
Well, we rode over in one of the Kaiser-built
Liberty ships?
Victory ships, or Liberty ships, I guess they were. We traveled in a convoy of about 70 ships, and it took us about over 30 days to arrive in Africa, because they went very slow and zigzagged around the ocean, I suppose, to avoid submarines.
How come it went so slow? Is it because the ships didn't have the ability to go any faster? Or?
That's true. They didn't go very fast.
Oh.
And besides, we had a motley collection of ships in the convoy. Some of them were tugboats, I know.
Oh, really?
And I always felt sorry for the men riding in the tugboats because they were very small.
They really get bounced around.
And they were disappear under the waves at times. And
Oh, wow. Whew. Wow.
So when you were shipped directly to Africa?
yes, we went directly to Africa, and we went to a training camp, processing camp out in the Sahara Desert in Algeria. We landed at Oran, which was a seaport, and we were prepared then or trained to go into Italy. And we went up to Italy, were involved with the Anzio beachhead as a reserve unit.
Oh, so you went in with some of the initial landings then in Anzio?
No, we were not the initial landing. We were a reserve unit, so we came after the landings were made.
How did you get to Italy?
Well, we went on ships. The one that I rode on was a British cruise ship.
Oh, it was a civilian liner,
It was a
basically.
civilian
It had been
liner
converted?
that had been impressed into service just to carry troops. And it was a cruise ship that had used to be used on the Mediterranean.
Sort of like an unfriendly love boat,
Yeah.
huh?
We had, the Germans apparently had very good intelligence. We used to impress us with how to, not to tell what we were doing in writing home, but the Germans seemed to know, because when we landed in Italy, the Axis Sally, who used to broadcast records and disc jockey programs to us, welcomed us and called some of us by name over the radio.
I'll be darned. Guess they did a good intelligence.
So they knew we were there.
When you arrived in Italy, were you immediately assigned to combat?
No, we were, well, very shortly after we went in to replace the 26th Division, which had been online for several months. And it was a rather stable condition. We were at the Monte Cassino, which you've probably heard of. It was an abbey, which was...
Yeah. In fact, I've got a book here about that, Augie.
Well, this was a stationary position. There was a lot of shells being sent back and forth.
Yeah, there was a lot of controversy over that, wasn't there? You were all bogged down there we'll move forward and then
How long were you in combat there when you were there?
the Allied powers gave the go-ahead to bomb it, didn't they?
We were there, yes, it was bombed while we were there, and the Abbey was, from what we could see, was completely destroyed. The upper buildings were, although I guess there were underground quarters there we didn't know about.
Oh, from what I can recall of having read that book, after having bombed that place, it really just gave them perhaps as good a fortification as they had before amongst all the rebels.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't think there were a lot of troops in the Abbey, although it was sitting way up on a hill.
It didn't take many, did it?
It overlooked the valley to a point where they had good observation of what we were doing. And in order to get to our position, you had to drive over a mile of flat terrain along the river where they could see you. And several times I've driven across there where a vehicle in front of me would be hit by an artillery shell.
How long were you in combat while you were there?
I was in this position and about 3 or 4 months. Once during this period, we were relieved and had a rest area. Went back to get cleaned up and new uniforms and so forth. And we made an attack where the casino was eventually captured. During this time, during this operation, I was a staff officer with one of the battalions. And the forward unit that I was assigned to was captured, or most of the men were killed, but some of them were captured, and I along with them. So I became a prisoner of war.
When was this, when you were captured?
This was in 1942, in May.
This was at the casino where you were captured?
No, I'm sorry, it was in 1944, in May. Yes, it was at casino.
So were you a POW then until the war was over?
Yes. Well, the war wasn't quite over when I was the Americans came in and overran our camp and released us.
So how long were you there? For about a year? Or?
I was a prisoner about 11 months. During this time, they first of all moved us to a camp in Poland where there were ground officers. There were several hundred ground officers there from different units, many of which had been captured in Africa. Even back when the British were fighting Rommel down in Africa. There were British and French and other officers there in the prisoner camp.
How were you treated there?
They treated us with respect and according to the rules of war, except that we got very little food to eat, so that we all lost a lot of weight. Some people died because of starvation, I suppose.
What did you see there?
Mostly we tried to entertain ourselves by running classes, teaching each other what we knew of our employment. We played games, read books, which were sent in by the Salvation Army.
You weren't in prison, any place where they had the Jews, were you? I mean, they didn't.
No,
They didn't mingle prisoners of war with the Jews that they were persecuting.
no, we didn't see any of that. Although one of our members escaped one time. He went out on a refuse garbage truck or something and got away and was walking around Poland, and he was recaptured and he was put in such a concentration camp where there were people that were executed at different times. And he came back and told us about it, but it wasn't the extermination camps that we read about for Jews.
What did he tell you happened there? What did he tell you that happened
Well,
there?
he said that there were people who would suddenly be taken out and they wouldn't come back anymore, and they'd hear the firing squads going.
Oof.
They were political prisoners that were being executed. When he finally said that he was a military prisoner and an American officer, they brought him back to our camp.
What were the conditions in the camp?
The conditions were okay. We had, except for food, we were quite comfortable. We had blankets, and we had bunks to sleep on that were not too comfortable, but
Do you think maybe you were treated better perhaps than some of the prisoners who were maybe captured earlier in the war?
the enlisted people were required to work, and I don't know whether that was better or worse, but they would be out repairing railroad tracks and things like that.
Oh.
Presumably they were paid for it, but there was nothing they could buy.
What were the Nazis like?
The mattresses were straw mattresses that we slept on. And as I said, when the Russians began coming into Poland, we left the camp and they marched us. We actually marched about 600 miles through Germany and down into the southern part of Austria near Salzburg. It took almost two months. And the procedure was to keep us in, we slept in churches evenings or in large cow barns or someplace that was large enough to handle a large number of people.
What were the Nazis like?
The what?
The Nazis, the German Nazis.
Oh. Well, at one time during our prisoner of war, we broke out and a raiding party came in from General Patton's army and released our prisoner camp, and we all got out and tried to make it back to the American lines, but we were recaptured again by a stormtrooper outfit. Now those were the elite troops, I guess, of the German army, and they were very severe with us, threatened all kinds of dire things, that they might shoot us and everything. But they didn't. They turned us over to another prison camp and put us back in the prison.
Did you have any contact with the Gestapo at all?
No. No. We were questioned at various times, and I don't know who did that, but if you had nothing unusual, they didn't pursue it very much. They always wanted to, if they knew that an officer was from the artillery, they always questioned him very much, more than the infantry people.
What were the nationalities of the other prisoners like? Were there from other countries?
Yes, there were French officers there there were British officers, some from India, and there were some from the Greek army.
How were the other prisoners treated?
They were treated the same as we while they were in our camp, although I understood that some of them in other camps, especially in the camps in Italy, had not been treated well. For example, one Greek fellow had needed surgery on his arm to get it straightened out, and they didn't give him any help, so he had a withered arm because of lack of medical attention.
Did you ever see any of the Jewish concentration camps? Like, did you ever go by them?
No, and I never saw a concentration camp. Yeah.
Were you forced to do any work while you were in the camps?
No, we were not. The officers were not required to work, although the enlisted men were. We got out of there in when the Americans came in, they finally released our camp, and we were sent back to the United States to be assigned to new outfits and go over to the Eastern Theater to fight against the Japanese. But the VJ Day and the atom bomb came along before that happened in 1945, and we were then discharged and sent home.
While you were in the camp, could you receive any humane medical treatment at all? Was there any available?
Yes, they had dentists, and we had some doctors who were also prisoners with us, some of our own doctors. We had some chaplains. We had a priest, and I guess a Protestant chaplain too, that were there as prisoners. And they had some medical supplies that were shipped in by the Salvation Army so they can treat us with anything that we needed.
Did you ever see any of the prisoners being tortured?
No, they didn't torture the prisoners.
Was there any resistance in the camps? Or did everybody do what they were supposed to?
Any conflict?
Any resistance? Did everybody do what they were supposed to?
We did what we were, on the surface, we did what we were supposed to do. Although when the Germans weren't looking, we did things that they didn't approve of.
Did any of the enlisted men who had to work on the railroads and stuff, did they ever sabotage anything, or?
I suppose they did. There was a lot of, in Germany, there was a lot of forced labor, and even during the war we used to see a lot of German shells come over that didn't explode, And on investigation, sometimes there would not be primers in the shells, and sometimes notes in them that said "Vive la France" or similar terminology.
Were there many men who didn't survive the internment of the camps?
Many of the prisoners,
Yeah.
the ones who died were very few. There were just several that died of apparently heart attacks.
Not from mistreatment, though, huh?
No,
Either because they were injured when they were put in there, or perhaps
partly,
due to illness that they contracted.
or because of starvation.
What was done with the people who were terribly ill or really badly injured?
They put them in hospitals, and I didn't happen to go there, so I don't know what they did, but I guess they had pretty good care in the German hospitals.
Were any of the prisoners interrogated, like were a lot of them questioned a lot?
Yes, we were all questioned. That was a general procedure, to question everybody. And they also offered us chances to defect and become part of the German army.
Did any of the people do this?
Not to my knowledge, I know of none that did that.
Did you ever see any Gestapo in the camps, like going to see other prisoners? Did you see them there?
No, it's possible that some were there posing as prisoners, but I didn't know of any.
Were there like dogs and guards and stuff used as surveillance?
There were guards, but they were all in uniform, and they were soldiers. Nearly all of them were older soldiers who would maybe not as good for combat, or ones who had been wounded and had a lame leg or something like that.
What were the attitudes of the prisoners towards the Nazis and the people running the camps?
They were quite friendly to us. On a personal basis. They were interested in where we came from, or what we did before we came in the Army, and things like that. But many of them were like we, had been drafted into the service and didn't care much about being in the military either. So.
Not all the soldiers were Nazis.
I know, but
You know, you have to understand that Nazism was a political movement. And if you were part of the government, you were a Nazi. And you didn't get to be a government official without being a Nazi. But not everybody who served in the military was a Nazi. I suspect probably some of the top-ranking officers perhaps were not even Nazis.
During the war, there was an attempt to assassinate Hitler with a bomb planted in his office or something. And I happened to be on a train at that time, being transported to the prison camp in Poland. And we didn't realize what had happened until the next day or so, but our train was stopped and put off on a siding, and the train carrying Hitler and his party passed us and went down to the south someplace. And there were guards all along looked like every 100 yards down the track, guards all over guarding the track to keep people away from it.
Yeah. That was just the day after the assassination attempt, huh?
Yes.
Well, let's see. What else can we ask, Joey?
think so. Not sure.
Well, we were prisoners. We witnessed several of the bombing raids of the British and the American Air Force had made in Germany. At one time saw them bomb a factory which looked like it was completely demolished.
I sent a bunch of questions to my brother because, see, my brother had been a B-17 pilot. And although he was, fortunately, was never captured, he did get shot down twice.
We often saw American planes go overhead on bombing missions, probably.
Who eventually freed you at the end?
It was the 3rd Army, which is General Patton's army, I believe, that came into Germany and occupied our camp. And they put us on trucks and moved us out as soon as they were able to.
When did you eventually come back to America? When did you eventually get home?
In 1945, I came back to the United States, went to a rest and recuperation camp, and in preparation for being sent over to the Pacific Theater, although I never got there.
I know another fellow back home who was a German prisoner of war. His name was Harper, if I recall correctly. This fellow used to have blackouts.
Yes, we did. That was because of hunger. We lost enough weight. My weight went down from 200 to 140, and we were so weak that if you stood up, everything would go black, and you had to wait a while until your vision came back. That was because of hunger.
I remember this fellow, I'd go someplace with him, and in the course of the evening, he'd forget that he'd taken me there, and he'd just hop in his car and leave.
Oh, well, I don't, that may be something else, but...
Maybe.
No,
even the civilian population suffered that way.
well, actually, our German guards didn't have food either. There would be weeks that they didn't get any rations. But they were free to go into the town and get what they could from the civilian population.
Okay. What other bits of information do you have there you can tell us about?
Yeah. Well, would you ever want to go back to Germany at all?
Well, I did go back during the Korean War. I went back but there was no war at that time. So
It was during the Berlin crisis?
no, during the Korean War.
Oh. Okay.
I was called into service again. Instead of going to Korea, they sent me to Germany again. So I was able to see Germany in a different light than I had seen it before.
What are your feelings towards Germany now? Would you ever want to go back there again?
Yes, I wouldn't mind going there to visit. My
Do you have any other comments about your service during World War II?
Well, when we first went over to be in the combat, we were sort of looking forward to it. We thought that it would be a good experience and that we would all be heroes, and that when we got there the war would soon be over. But it wasn't that way. It was a lot more unpleasant than we had anticipated. And being shot at was not a lot of fun.